Hey everybody, welcome to the Blendr Report, where news meets rational thinking. I'm your host, Jonathan Harvey. This is your co-host, Liam DeBoer. Liam, what are we talking about today?
Today, we're covering the kickoff to Canada's national election, promises of tax cuts, Carney dodging the French debate, and Liberal corruption on day one. We'll break down Poilievre and Carney trading accusations of foreign interference, the old, rich, and out-of-touch demographic keeping the Liberal Party alive, Elections Canada pleading with big tech to police misinformation ahead of the election, and what politicians really mean when they promise to invest in Canada. All right, let's get started. So first off, we've got election kickoff. Conservatives co-opt social programs, Liberals push military as NDP faces existential crisis. With an election approaching, Canada's political dynamics are shifting rapidly. Pierre Poilievre's Conservatives are promoting a populist/pragmatic blend, offering GST relief on new homes and embracing pharmacare and dental care to appeal to both fiscal and social priorities. In contrast, the Liberals, under Mark Carney's influence, are betting on bold gestures like promising new submarines. Meanwhile, the NDP is fading, with former leader Tom Mulcair urging voters to abandon the party. As Conservatives absorb progressive ideas and Liberals pivot to defense, the NDP faces internal disillusionment and a shrinking political space. So which party is positioning itself the best as campaigning for the election begins?
Okay, so it's hard to say who's really doing the best job right now, but what I would do is just kind of quickly go over what I think's going on with every party. First of all, the NDP looks like they might get wiped off the face of the earth. They don't have much left from the most recent polls, for however much weight you want to put on those. They're sitting at 9%, which is more than 50% below where they're usually at. They're usually hovering around 20. So they're in real trouble. I mean, from my understanding, and I don't know if it's true, but I think it was, there wasn't even enough money in the NDP coffers for Jagmeet Singh to take a plane ride, so he had to ride the bus.
Yeah, I saw a reporter talking about how they're riding buses to all the NDP campaign stops. So that probably checks out.
And then obviously too, with a previous NDP leader, Tom Mulcair, saying, "Don't vote for these guys." I've never seen that in politics. So I'm sure it's happened, but I've never seen a leader of a party basically denounce the party or the leader of the party at some other time. Not even in the States with Trump. You saw a lot of people that were right-wing, that were like Cheney and them, say, no, vote for Kamala Harris, don't vote for Trump. But nobody that was the leader. So for me, that says a lot. So I think they're in some real trouble. But anyway, not really a significant deal anyway. So when you look at the Liberals, they're actually not doing a bad job from a administrative perspective, right? So they've implemented a bunch of conservative policies like cutting the carbon tax, nixing the capital gains tax rise, the GST for first-time home buyers, which is obviously a pull right from conservatives. And for them, it was under $1 million. And then they offered a small tax break. However, they are sort of losing their footing with Carney. He is, in my opinion, not really prepared for the job. So the cracks are starting to show. The facade is starting to, you can see through it, right? So you're seeing this with his temper. You're seeing it with the conflicts of interest. Brookfield just keeps getting worse and worse. You'd remember better than I will, but from my understanding, they're one of the largest, if not the largest, tax evader in North America.
Yeah, the Canadians for Tax Fairness called Brookfield, quote, one of the biggest users of offshore schemes and urged future governments to crack down on such loopholes. So as far as the investment play goes, the Brookfield is one of the biggest players of moving money outside of Canada so they can get around taxes.
So he's one of the biggest tax dodgers. It's very like rules for you, not for me type situation. So I don't know. I think cracks are showing, but ultimately I don't think he knows the information. I think that's going to be his biggest problem. So I think he understands the script. But the thing is, anytime he gets challenged beyond that, or his ideas get challenged, he trips over his words and doesn't know what to say. So I just don't think he's ready for the job. And the longer this drags out, I think the more trouble they're in.
You know what's really interesting though is because you could, like, for instance, because I think about this, I put myself in their shoes. Okay, if it came out, if I was running for prime minister and it came out that I was using tax loopholes in Bermuda, like, how would I try to spin this politically? Like, what would be the move? If it was anybody other than Carney and the Liberals, you could actually make a really good campaign thing about this of just going like, yeah, you're right. To be honest, I didn't want to give my taxes to a government that was wasting it, and I didn't see any benefit to paying these sort of taxes. But my goal as prime minister would be to give you so much belief in your country that you want to pay taxes. and I will help turn this country into one that I would happily have my money in.
That'd be a great campaign.
And you could campaign
you
it
could
now,
spin that quick.
but Carney can't do that
No.
because he's been teamed up with the Liberals for the last 10 years. So how could you say that, oh, well, this country isn't
that
worth
last
having?
party, gee.
Right. Yeah.
So I think the Liberals are doing a reasonable job in terms of their policy strategy, but I think that there are cracks showing with the leader, and they're going to struggle to cover those up with the media over the next 5 weeks. Then with the Conservatives, honestly, I think they're a little disorganized, and I think they're shooting from the hip a little more than they should be. It almost seems like they're still not really prepared for the election. I'm sure that they are, but that's just the way it's coming across to me. They did do some stuff from a policy perspective. They did a 15% tax cut, no GST on homes for first-time buyers under 1.3 million, which is fine. I like that they did that. They're also, like you said, interested in keeping some form of dental care or pharmacare. I'm not a fan of that, to be honest with you. But and here's why. 2 reasons. First of all, I don't like the programs. Second of all, well, now our right conservative party that's already very sort of center right or kind of maybe even just center now looks like they're going left of center when they keep these social programs. So I'm not a big fan of that.
That is what's funny about when somebody like Pierre Poilievre gets called right wing, and you're like, he's more left than Bernie Sanders.
Yes.
If you look at the fact that, yeah, he doesn't want to touch things like dental care and pharmacare. I also think they should definitely axe the whole $10 a day child care.
Well, all it did was nationalize that industry and screw the whole thing up.
Well, and also part of it too is the federal government pretty much like, don't worry, we'll fund the whole program for 3 to 5 years, and then we're sticking it on the provinces. And so the whole program, it's like, yeah, it's going to be in their hands for a couple of years, but then they're just leaving the mess with other governments.
Yeah.
But either way, going to the whole Poilievre and being left thing, it's like, it's crazy because there really isn't you could say there's the PPC as far as a conservative party in Canada.
Yeah, but we don't talk about that.
But no, it's just they're so unappealing. Their most ardent supporters are super aggressive and just don't even make me want to be aligned with them in any way. But then even also like Maxime Bernier, I don't think he has what it takes to sell. Even if I say agreed with his policies, I don't think he has what it takes to sell those policies to Canadians.
No, I agree. And you know what? This is maybe unfair, but because he is from Quebec and he does have an accent, there's enough of a rift between Quebec and the rest of the country, just historically, that I think that alone, I don't think he'd get any real traction, even if he was leading one of these other parties. I think he'd have real trouble. I really do. And I think that's a sign of the times, and it's not even my opinion in terms of how I feel about the situation or how I feel about him. I just think that's the reality we live in. So it just is what it is. But the last thing I would sort of say about the Conservatives before I kind of give you my percentages of where I think this election is going to land is that I think Pierre needs to shift away from just doing the rallies and the mainstream media stuff, because the mainstream media, he's losing the boomer vote because the boomers won big with the Liberals. We all know they did. So we'll talk about that a little later. Now, obviously, there's boomers that listen to us. They're not going to vote for Carney. They're going to vote for Poilievre. They understand it. But for the most part, they get their media from the mainstream, right? So those people have already kind of bought into the Liberal Party if you look at the polls. So I think that he is doing himself a disservice by just doing rallies and just feeding mainstream media and talking to, liberal journalists as well, a lot of their jobs are on the line. I think he would do himself a big favor if he would go and start speaking to people in the podcast space again, in the independent media space, or just do more of it, especially because he's got new policy strategies. So that would be your opportunity to sort of win some of those votes over again, because that's obviously where he lost a chunk of them when that liberal wave happened, right? So I think that would be a good strategy for him from a effective campaign strategy in terms of his policy. Yeah, I think he's got to keep going. I think he's got to keep his foot on the gas with policy because the Liberals are doing the same. Now, in terms of where I think things sit today, just my opinion, of course, I think that there's a 20% chance that the Liberals win a minority Liberal government. I think there's a 20% chance. I think there is a 50% chance that the Conservatives win a minority. And I think right now that there is a 30% chance that the Conservatives win a majority. That's just me sort of compiling all the information I have in my head, and that's what I think.
Yeah, I agree. I don't think there's much of a scenario as to where the Liberals win. And I would be shocked if they win this election. I think we're being Kamala Harris when it comes to all the polls and stuff.
Yeah.
And there's a lot of fake support. You even look at how everything kicked off. So for instance, that first rally that Poilievre did, there's lineups around the block in North York.
Yeah.
that's a very telling sign considering it's typically a liberal stronghold. There was also, like, you look at his Hamilton rally as well. I think it was today or even yesterday, maybe. But either way, Hamilton was after North York. But the packed, like, again,
Hamilton
lineups.
was today, yeah.
And then you look at Carney's, which was the first day that he did a rally. He was met with like 100 protesters from the fisheries in New Brunswick.
Then he locked them out.
Or sorry, it was Newfoundland.
Yeah.
Sorry, not New Brunswick. But and then locks them out so he doesn't have to face them.
Oopsie.
But this is what I've been telling people, because there are a lot of conservatives that are, or like conservative supporting people that are freaked out about Carney and the Liberals making a resurgence. And don't get me wrong, I think they've done an okay job over the first week or two after he did the Liberals to hide Carney and hide his background. But I don't think they can keep it up for a full month. And I think the further we go down into this, the more his entire charade is going to collapse. And I do think that somewhere in the neighborhood of 2 to 4 weeks from now, before the election, I think his whole campaign starts to implode, because you already just look at how he's handling the pressure now.
Yeah.
Which this is the least amount of pressure right now. As you get closer to the election, the pressure just gets higher, the attention becomes more. So he's only going to perform worse, I think, in those scenarios. But like, you look at him like, okay, for instance, a reporter asked him about his conflicts of interest, and just listen to his tone. Like, he cannot handle these things well politically at all.
Mr. Carney, Stephanie Levitz, the Globe and Mail. We understand that you have now placed your assets in a blind trust, so you don't know what's happening to them going forward, but you knew what they were going into that blind trust. So what are they?
Look, Stephanie, I follow the rules of the Ethics Commissioner. I'm following them well in advance of any of the requirements, as you know, because I know you know this. You know that these requirements come into effect in months. We're talking days after I became Prime Minister. So I'm complying with the rules of the Ethics Commissioner, going through the processes and all these things that are necessary. And I will remind you, and I'll remind Canadians again, that the Leader of the Opposition cannot find it. And look, you look at the questions this evening, you look at the nature of the discussions, look at the nature of discussions I had with the President of France, the Prime Minister of the United Kingdom. The Leader of the Opposition would not be capable of having those discussions because the Leader of Opposition refuses to get his security clearance.
So, okay, forget the political deflection there, trying to turn it around on Poilievre, which is obviously nonsense. Like, the idea that unless he gets the NSICOP security clearance, and which would gag him from talking about anything within those reports, to say that unless he does that, he can't have a conversation with the president of France. Like, that's, first of all, just mental. Ridiculous.
Also, he shouldn't get it right now. I've seen a number of people in the political space being like, that's a bad idea for him to get it. Also, if he's not the leader, why does he have to talk to those people anyway?
For sure. But also, even just like, did you pick up on the little condescension?
Oh, there? For sure. I know you already know, Stephanie.
Yeah, which I know you already know. And well, Stephanie, I followed the rules. And so, like, you can see that.
That's actually a week and a half ago, I think.
Exactly. And so when you see him pushed in these scenarios, he doesn't do well. And it was the same thing with
he's getting worse, right? Because I saw another one and I was just like, oh, he's getting temperamental.
Yep. He's starting to feel the heat. And like, even look at this one. This one was just from the other day.
Are you the last local person? Can we? Okay. I feel that,
2 minutes, please.
Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Carney. Thank you, Mr. Carney. But even just that, like, getting testy with the fact of just being, well, are you the last? Like, he just,
again, who speaks to someone like that? You think, put yourself in a scenario like that. If you're in front of that many people and someone's asking you questions and your job is literally to sit there and answer them, you get pissed off because someone's local asking you questions. That is so out of touch with reality of not only just in being a decent human, but what your job is. Yeah, that's trouble.
And so again, I'm not saying that either one of those moments is enough to sink a campaign, but
definitely not.
But again, all I'm saying is that you can already see him starting to crack. And I think the more pressure, the more that comes out about his ties, the more CBC articles about his, say, Bermuda tax havens and this kind of stuff, the worse those moments are going to get, to the point where, like,
I agree.
part of me would love to just see him like completely blow up in the last in the main election, or sorry, the main debate, and just start like losing his lid. But even the Telegraph actually, you know, posted or released an article saying that he's got a raging temper.
Oh yeah, they're not a fan of him over there. I think a lot of people are confused. He wears it like a badge of honor. Like, oh, I ran the Bank of England. It's like, yeah, you ask anybody in England what they think of him though? Even Liz Truss shredded him. So Liz Truss was the prime minister for a very short period of time. And I think she handled her, I think she took it on the chin pretty well, how she kind of got railroaded. But it was interesting for her to be like, and not like saying, oh, it's all his fault, but being like, oh no, he's a big part of the reason why I got ousted so quickly.
Mm-hmm.
Like, she was very, very calm and collected. Not like, oh, not I'm trying to get mine. Not, oh, I deserve something more. She's like, oh no, he was a big reason why, and he also supported the Labour Party. I was just like, oh wow, got it.
So, and then last little clip I'll show of him here is him when he was getting pressed on the Bermuda aspect. But this is the thing too, like, okay, even if you are him and you have this conflict of interest and you're trying to political maneuver your way around it, you have to be smart. Like, you can't just tell people, like as we're going to see in this clip, you can't just tell people like, well, I understand things you just don't understand. Like, that is not going to win over anybody.
No.
You're not going to be able to manipulate your way out of a scenario by just being like, you're dumb, just listen to me, trust me.
Well, especially the thing is, these are left-leaning journalists. Mm-hmm. So you talk to them like that, they're gonna come at you.
Mm-hmm.
That's the last thing you want to do, is piss off people that are already supporting you.
Case of those Brookfield funds, like, what was the argument for registering the funds in Bermuda? Is it ethical to do that? And is it something as Prime Minister that you'd have to crack down on? I'm not sure if it's a problem, but is that something that you'd have to crack down on?
I think the important thing, Tom, is that the flow through of the funds go to Canadian entities who then pay the taxes appropriately, as opposed to taxes being paid multiple times before they get there. So that's how we have the structure. That's the structure that all of our pension funds, par exemple, the Caisse de dépôt, or Ontario teachers, or OMERS, municipal employees, or all the big pension funds in Canada, which are very successful, which protect union workers in many cases. I'm speaking of union workers today, and supply to them. It's those entities and their employees who are covered. So the structures work for that effect.
So he's trying to pitch the idea that, actually, guys, it's actually beneficial for me to be putting this money into tax havens in Bermuda, because it's really good for the pensioners in Canada. You're like, what? Like, how does...
Like, let me be clear. I totally agree with his economic strategy.
Yeah.
It's great. But you can't be now the leader of the Liberal Party. You
Exactly.
just can't. You can't do both of these things. They're too far in opposition of one another. So it's gonna be a challenge.
Yeah, no, 100%. And again, yeah, I agree with you. I actually don't even have that much issue with anybody being like, oh, I'm going to try to keep my money out of the hands of the Canadian government.
20% of my life, I think about offshoring my money so that I don't have to pay taxes here. Literally, that much of my attention goes to it. So I'm on board. But
It's just that, yeah, you can't be... Really, it's that you can't be anything outside of you can't be anything other than a conservative in trying, because when your whole thing is that you need to make rich people pay more in taxes, like the Liberal and NDP have been shouting for decades, then yeah, you can't be that guy.
No, it's also kind of funny too when you look at the people that are supporting him. Like, it speaks volumes, because those are the people that would have never really, like, the older generation that's wealthy. Now they don't. That's a conservative. That's a conservative cohort historically. Now they're all liberals. And, like, say what you want to say and be on any side you want, but when you look at that comparison, it does tell you where the party is today.
For sure. All right, next story, we've got tax cuts, debate dodges, and liberal corruption. Canada's federal election kicked off with sharp contrasts. Pierre Poilievre launched his campaign with a promise to cut income taxes by 15% and dismantle bureaucratic waste, framing the tax system as punishment for working hard. He drew massive crowds in Toronto, while Mark Carney faced angry fishers and backed out of a key debate, drawing criticism. Meanwhile, the Liberal Party is mirrored in scandal after disqualifying challenger Ruby Dalla and keeping her $350,000 entry fee. Poilievre positioned himself against globalism and uncontrolled immigration, drawing a battle line between state control and individual empowerment. This election may redefine Canada's political future. So, how important is the debate over globalism versus national sovereignty in shaping Canada's political direction?
I think it's super important. I just don't know if enough people know what's happening here. I think when you live in Canada and you operate in Canada and you kind of operate within your community, you maybe don't really know what's happening at a provincial level or a national level with a lot of bandwidth. And then especially globally, you don't really pick up on those things. You just feel it sometimes. But this I think this is very, very significant. I mean, obviously you've got Poilievre who is pitching himself as more the champion of national interest. You got Carney, who represents the continuation of liberal globalist policies. But I want to take a step back and then almost be like, okay, what does this actually affect if you go more globalist versus more national? And first things first is you have more centralization versus decentralization, right? You've got more power at the top. And you and I know, if you think about a leader in a country trying to tell you how you should live in your small town on the East Coast or the West Coast or Central Ontario, like there's no way that person understands enough about every community to effectively give them their marching orders. It's just not going to work that way. So when you're doing it from the top down, with these global organizations, it's only going to get worse. So more centralization. I think we start losing more of our cultural identity and social cohesion. Now, people argue all the time that Canada doesn't have much of a cultural identity. I have a hard time arguing with them on that, but social cohesion, I think, is a big one because we know, look, there is nothing wrong with multi-ethnicity, but multicultural. If you got different ideas on how you want the world to run and we're all in the same ship, well, the ship can only go in one direction. So eventually the ship either capsizes or there's a war internally to decide who gets to steer where it goes. And I think that we've had a taste of that over the last few years with the mass immigration into Canada, right? I think also we're going to see a lot more government overreach versus personal responsibility and freedom. So again, this isn't necessarily because of the globalism push, but I think it's paired with it. That's the mentality you have of you need larger government and you need us in every part of your business, where the Conservatives are really going the other way, more for personal freedom. We'll obviously have weaker national security and even more foreign influence. And the thing is, if you think about that one, so our national security is already shit. Our military is already falling apart. Everybody already knows that. And we already have foreign influence and everything. It's very clear. But if you continue driving more and more and more immigration, well, now if more of my people are in that country, not only do I have more of a vested interest in that country, but I have more influence in that country. So again, this is just, you will basically lose control of the nation. I don't know what it will be in 20 years if we continue down this path. Our energy and resource independence will be gone to satisfy these global climate agendas, which to me is, it's insane how they're able to use faulty science and bad math to convince everybody that we shouldn't be leveraging our natural resources to actually save this country and be profitable. It's just wild to me.
It's even crazier than that, because think about how they want to do this green energy transition, right? Well, we're going to carbon tax and do all of this kind of stuff, tax Canada's natural resources. So you've got essentially, this is oversimplified, but just the principle is true. Where, okay, we're going to tax things like oil and gas to subsidize the green energy, but then while simultaneously cutting oil and gas. So you go, but you're using the oil and gas, which is our number one commodity as a country, to subsidize your transition.
Yes.
Once you cut this, you don't have any more subsidy.
It's insane. It doesn't make any sense whatsoever. And on the note of agendas too, if we go down this liberal line with more globalism, we're talking Agenda 2030, you're talking about the World Economic Forum's Great Reset, you're talking about net zero, and these are all about control. Like everything in these agendas is about control. Controlling your movement, controlling your freedom and consumption, and controlling your speech, you name it. This is the direction we go if we end up more towards globalism. And in my opinion, the Liberal Party right now, I think that's the direction they're steering this nation. So I think it's so weird sometimes to say this because it sounds so hyperbolic or just like you're disconnected and don't really live in reality. But I do think that this election is the most important one of this generation for sure, of my lifetime for sure. And the reason is because I think that we are very close to the edge of a cliff. And what I mean by the cliff is not that necessarily the Liberals are driving us off a cliff and we're all going to die, but once you drive over it, the Canada that we grew up in and the Canada that we knew is gone. And we're very close to the edge. And that's my concern if the Liberals win this election. I think they drive us off. and then there's an entirely new Canada, I think I'm gone. I think I'm out. So for me, this is the issue with globalism, more so versus, sort of the national interests.
Well, you even just look at who's surrounding the Carney party, right? So you've got Mark Wiseman, who is the founder or one of the main architects of the Century Initiative, which aims to have Canada's population at 100 million by 2100. So imagine the last few years of immigration pace drawn out for another 75 years.
Oh my God. Well, eventually it would get easier, but like 60 years from now.
I don't think it would even really, but think about that. When you talk about, I don't think the Liberals would drive us off a cliff and everyone dies. Maybe we don't die, but I think millions of people go hungry. Very, very severely.
I didn't want to sound too hyperbolic, so that's why I was just kind of reeling in my analogy because anyway, yeah.
But even just think, right? Okay, simple economic principles, supply and demand.
Yes.
Well, where our productivity is not increasing at all, so we're not actually making more goods or resources or having any growth on that front. But okay, you double the amount of people that are trying to buy those goods and resources. Well, you just double the price again. Now you pair that with the fact that the Liberal government is also talking about doing deficits, right?
3 more years.
Right. So you think about the financial changes of the last 5 years and you just go, all right, compound this over time. It can get that bad. And again, I'm not trying to be a black pillar in saying that it's hopeless. I do very much think you can avoid that future. However, you let these people continue going, gas pedal to the floor with their agenda. I think that
cliff's coming
for sure. And I think I do think it can be worse than a lot of people are willing to imagine. I mean, and it's not even I hate this idea that that's hyperbolic. You're no, this has happened in so many countries throughout history. This idea that a country can't fall into complete economic despair and people starve is we have the entire 20th century history to point to that being very possible. Just between the Soviet Union and the Chinese Communist Party. And again, the Chinese Communist Party is the head of this snake, essentially, when you look at this globalist agenda. They alone, that party, the party currently in charge of China, up to 60 million people died from famines by their policies. Direct result.
Mm-hmm.
That's not natural disasters, that's political disaster. And you go, yeah, that's 60 million people. That can happen. And to me, I think it's only more likely if you pretend that it's not possible.
Yeah, I just think sometimes when you have these conversations, I don't disagree with anything you're saying. I just think sometimes when you have these conversations, if that's where you land, you lose people.
Yep.
And I think the reality is you need to motivate people to understand the situation we're walking into so they do the right things, because now it's not that bad. But if you look at the compound effect, it gets very bad. Like you said, 60 million people, obviously that's China, not Canada. But there's a way to get people to take action today. And there's a way to get them to take action partway through when 30 million people have already died in your scenario, right? So getting people to take action when a bunch of people have already succumbed to bad political policy, everyone's ready to take action. But now, if you push them too far, I'm afraid that they won't make a movement. They won't change. They won't do anything because it's still a problem for tomorrow. You know what I mean?
Here's a good way to think about it, I guess, then, is that, because I don't disagree with you, and when people only ever talk about that, and they also talk about it as if it's bound to happen, this mass economic collapse is going to happen, there's nothing we can do. So I completely agree, you lose people with that, and I also disagree with them that you can't avoid it. But there's a good evolutionary theory here where, so there was a study where rats were put in a cylinder tube, and they put at the back of the rat, they would put a smell of the predator, and they would measure how hard the rat tried to run. And so obviously it tries to move away from the smell of the predator. They also ran the same study going, okay, now we're going to put the no smell of predator, but we're going to put cheese at the other end of the tunnel. How hard does it run towards the cheese versus away from the predator? And obviously, like, it seems very simple, but this is pertinent to the conversation, is the rat ran the hardest when it had the smell of the predator and the smell of the reward of cheese. Obviously, it's going to dart. It's like, I know which direction I need to head. It's very similar in this sense where you go, okay, the predator, the smell of the predator is this potential of economic disaster.
Yes.
The thing is that, yes, when you're also outlining these kind of things, you need to give them the direction to run towards. You can't just be like predator, 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 because then in what direction should I run, right?
Yes.
You have to be like, and this is the way away from it.
That's why we vote conservative.
Yeah.
Well, I mean, for today, hey, look, I say this all the time and I'll say it again. I don't think the conservative party is the answer all the time. I don't think the liberal party is a problem all the time. In today's landscape, though, it's very clear. And for people that are like, oh, I'm going to vote PPC or this or that, vote splitting is a real thing.
Mm-hmm.
I would not do that. I would just focus on being like, okay, like just be pragmatic. Think about it. Don't do this. Don't ideologically vote because you want to stand on some moral high ground. Think about the scenario. It's one of two things that are going to happen here. That's all it is. And then vote accordingly. But anyway, yeah, I think that's a good perspective. That's a good point.
Well, actually, just on that note, there's an argument to be made that if, let's say Maxime Bernier was legitimate and he just wants to see the best possible future for Canada. And I'm not even saying that that's not his scenario, but if he was smart, if that's his value, and he's also extremely intelligent, if I was in his shoes, I would look at it and go, I would RFK it and go, I think I am going to have more success getting my vision of Canada by allying myself with the Conservatives and say, hey, partner with me on a couple of these key policies I really care about, and I'll throw my support behind you, rather than I'm going to go toe-to-toe with them and end up probably with nothing.
That's a really good point.
Actually, you know what? Not even probably. You are going to end up with nothing. There's zero chance. I wouldn't be surprised if they don't win a single seat across the country.
Yeah, no, that sounds about right. I think that's there's a couple things there. First of all, it's very difficult to start a new party and have any success for quite some time. They've built a system that it's very, very hard to penetrate. So that's not necessarily an attack on the PPC or Bernier. It's just kind of the reality of the situation. The best candidate with all the best ideas could jump in right now, and it would still take multiple terms to make any real progress. The fact that he's made as much as he has, actually, I think is a sign of how bad times are in Canada, because it should be even harder, to be honest with you. But yeah, to your point, I think that would actually be the best case, the best solution for him. The only thing is, yes, you do fold up the PPC party, and that kind of it no longer exists. But the reality is, how much longer is he going to be around? How much longer is he going to continue to push the party and the ideas? I don't know. I think that's a really good solution for them. Yeah. Before we move on to the next topic, this episode is brought to you by The Tallow Truth. Would you ever eat your skincare? No? Then why put it on your skin, your body's biggest organ? Most skincare products are loaded with chemicals that absorb straight into your body. That hydrating cream might as well come with a hazard warning. Your skin needs real nourishment, not lab experiments. That's why I use F-Bomb from The Tallow Truth, made from grass-fed, grass-finished tallow. It's also hormone-free, antibiotic-free, steroid-free, GMO-free, and even vaccine-free. Nothing artificial, nothing toxic, just results. I've been using F-Bomb from The Tallow Truth for almost a year now, and honestly, I'm never going back. My skin feels hydrated, my fine lines are reducing, and I just look better. Plus, I'm already 40. This shit's not going to get any easier for me. But what makes The Tallow Truth even better is that they're a Freedom First brand that supports Blendr News and everything we stand for. They even offer a 30-day money-back guarantee, so you've got nothing to lose. So, go to thetallowtruth.com/blender and use code BLENDR, BLENDR, for 15% off. This includes 15% off already discounted bundles too, so you can save as much as 40%. That's thetallowtruth.com/blender, code BLENDR at checkout for 15% off.
All right, moving on to our next story. We've got Poilievre and Carney trade blows over foreign interference ahead of Canadian election. India allegedly interfered in Pierre Poilievre's 2022 leadership race, but CSIS confirmed he had no knowledge of it. Despite this, political operatives attempted to discredit him as Mark Carney prepares to lead the Liberals. Poilievre responded by exposing Carney's deep financial ties to China, including a $276 million loan from the Bank of China to Brookfield. Meanwhile, Liberal operatives ignored CSIS warnings on Chinese interference. The scandal highlights selective outrage and media bias, especially from outlets like the Globe and Mail, who have publicly stated partnerships with initiatives aligned with Mark Carney's campaign. So is the media selectively applying outrage when it comes to foreign interference in Canadian politics?
Yeah, so let's be clear. They're fighting for their lives right now, right? So I just started doing an article on this right now. I'll have it out tomorrow. But there's some really, really stark numbers. It's funny, I started writing about something completely different. Then I saw this thread and I was like, oh my God, I got to pull this. So I'm just in the middle of sort of knitting this sweater, but I'll list off some stats. Since the Liberal government got in, they funneled over $18 billion into the media. $18 billion. So that's an average of 1.8, but now they're averaging over 2 billion. So it's ramping up. 75, there's a survey done in 2024. 75% of journalists surveyed felt pressured to toe the Liberal line because of where their funding was coming from. 75%. The other 25% are liars. Over 500 organizations are now receiving money directly from the government in the media space. That is mental. That is so. How many independent organizations do you know of that's kind of like in our space? Like maybe 5?
Yeah,
maybe there's
nothing.
maybe 500 of them are getting funding from government coffers. And another stat that I read today was that 90% of all media, this is fucking wild if it's true, 90% of all media consumed in Canada comes through subsidized sources. 90% of all media consumed comes through a subsidized source. And over 80% of all media outlets in Canada are subsidized, from news websites, broadcast news, and even magazines. That's insane. The reason that's insane is they give Viktor Orban from Hungary shit on the global stage for nationalizing his media because 80% of it is subsidized by the government. We do the exact same thing here. But here's the problem. You also can't change the fabric of an organization. So if you had a Liberal Party for the last 10 years that's been giving you all this money and you've been scaling up and your organization's big and you're robust and you've built this culture, what did you build? You built a liberal-leaning culture. There's no way for it to shift back the other way. So, even if they had people, even if the leaders were sympathetic to the conservative cause going, if we don't actually toe the conservative line, we're going to lose all of our funding anyway, like full stop. The people that are their boots on the ground, they're not going to change their minds anyway. So yeah, it's definitely biased. They're definitely liberally biased. We all know it. It's just, hopefully the conservatives can find a way to fight through it and get through this election.
Yeah, it's funny because anytime we post, right, we're selling these death by taxes hoodies, which you can find at blendrnews.com, by the way, BLENDR news.com, without fail. Every time we post in the comments on tag, say from Blendr account, say you can pick up the hoodie here, whatever, when we wear it in a video, without fail, there's always somebody that comments and says, oh, and there's the grift, or at least you're open and honest about your grift, right? Which is funny because
I love those people.
Well, I
give them my address actually if they want. You guys can come here and you can say that. It'd be great.
I actually laugh because if you think about it, like a grift is essentially like you're just hopping on something for the money train, right? So you look at it.
It sounds very scammy.
Right. So you look at that and you go, what's a bigger grift here? Our media business model, which is we give everything away for free, and if you'd like to support us, you can do so by buying a product that hopefully you also like.
Which also supports another Canadian business.
Or what 90% of the other media is grifting on, which is we will take money from the Canadian taxpayers and then spread propaganda that is against their interests.
Yes.
That's a way bigger grift than anything we could ever possibly come up with. But it is just funny that people, it's like, that's not even an argument against us. So
that was a great comparison.
So I don't take it, personally at all, because I'm like, I know we're not grifting, but yeah, you think about that in this media bias, right? Because even the Globe and Mail, who released this article about Pierre Poilievre and the India interference, they're partnered with the Century Initiative, which is that goal to have Canada's population 100 million by 2100. And Mark Wiseman, again, architect, who's in Carney's PMO, the Prime Minister's office. So you go, the media is directly in partnership, publicly stated partnership with this group. Again, of course, they're going to be biased. And it is interesting as to even just how this, because like this isn't new information, and I'm not saying that you can't talk about anything from the past, because even now, this is something I've realized is that, all right, maybe the Overton window shifts a little bit, and something I talked about 2-3 years ago that didn't go very far because there wasn't any appeal for
there's no appetite for the information,
that information, then I can say it again now and go, oh, now people are ready for this information. Yes. So I'm not even saying that I'm against the fact of them bringing it up from the past, but it is telling the fact that they're trying to resurface this scandal per se, which isn't really even a scandal, because again, the CSIS says like he didn't they didn't know anything about it, and also Patrick Brown even came out in public, who was running against Poilievre, and said like, yeah, even if this happened, Poilievre was winning, like he won fair and square. But then you look at, okay, what are the things they're silent about? Well, they're silent about all of the Chinese interference in Canada's elections.
Is significantly worse, and people are doing it, quote unquote, wittingly.
Right.
We have over a dozen politicians wittingly participating with China. Give me a break.
And so, yeah, it is annoying in that sense, because here's another reason why it's extremely hypocritical to even try to point to this right now. Because, okay, let's say even if Poilievre did benefit from foreign interference, which he probably did, like India, I think, was throwing their weight behind him, because it's also important to know, okay, let's even think about it this way. If the Liberal Party is completely captured by China, then India, who has a bitter rival and is like constantly in conflict with China, would have a interest in countering the Liberal Party.
Yes. So it's a yin and yang situation. So, you're getting it's happening no matter what.
So let's even say, and I don't think this is the case, but I'll grant it for the argument. The Liberal Party is completely compromised by China. The Conservative Party is completely compromised by India. Let's just say that. Then, okay, you've got two scenarios here, which is that CSIS is saying the Liberals, or at least some of them, know that they are compromised and are working to be compromised, and they have the power in order to, say, implement policy or make structural changes that would then hopefully limit the foreign interference.
Yes.
But then there's, on the other side, you've got the Conservatives and Poilievre, who say doesn't know that the foreign interference is there. He's not wittingly in bed with them. And then also, he doesn't have any power to do anything about it anyways.
Yes, that's correct.
And so you go, oh, like you're trying to, it's not just a double standard, but it's worse than that.
Yes, because it's like one's an authority figure, the other, almost like one's the teacher, one's the student.
Right.
And you're giving the student more shit, and the teacher's doing it a lot worse, and they actually have the power to change it. Yeah, that's actually another good point.
All right, moving on to our next story. We've got old, rich, and out of touch. Who really supports the Liberal Party? The Liberal Party's remaining stronghold is wealthy Canadians over 65, those least affected by housing or inflation and most obsessed with Donald Trump. Ecos polling shows the Liberals are unpopular among the poor and working class, while dominating among the upper class. Abacus data reveals a generational divide. Younger Canadians prioritize housing and affordability, while older voters fixate on Trump. This reveals a striking paradox. Liberals claim to defend the vulnerable but are rejected by them, while their most loyal supporters are the very elite whose assets have soared under destructive economic policies they now vote to preserve without bearing the consequences. So, have older generations benefited from economic sabotage while leaving younger Canadians to suffer the consequences?
Absolutely. Yes. Older, wealthier Canadians, especially these Liberal voters, have largely escaped the economic consequences of these Trudeau-era policies. Obviously younger working class Canadians are left to sort of pick up the tab, but let's kind of consider what the tab is. Housing costs or never being able to afford a home. Inflation and the cost of living. And, I did a video the other day when I think about inflation and cost of living, because people could say, well, inflation's down, Jonathan. Okay. So, okay.
From when?
Yeah, exactly. So I did a video the other day, and this is pretty wild. So based on current data, the average family of 4 is expected to have a take-home income in Canada of $92,000. That's after taxes, $92,000. The average cost of living for that same family of 4 in Canada is $99,000. So you go, oh my God, every family is losing $7,000 a year. But that calculation for take-home income doesn't include the cost of servicing debt. So when you include the cost of the average cost of servicing debt, it's actually 15%. But I went with 10 just because I didn't want it to sound too unbelievable. So if you add 10% of that person's take-home income, another $9,000, now that means that the average family of 4 in Canada right now is going $16,000 further into debt just to survive in this country. So yeah, inflation and cost of living are a real problem for average Canadians and these upcoming generations. That's one other part of the tab. The next thing obviously is taxation and government debt. Our taxes are higher than almost any other country in the world. I think collectively we're taxed more than any other nation in the world, I think, if you look at all the taxes together. But if not, we're right up there. But it's also our government debt. Like, that doesn't go away. And you know that it affects your dollar on the global scale. You know it's creating a windfall of bad effects. So that's, again, this upcoming generation's problem. And these people are not going to have to deal with it. And, obviously now, too, we're dealing with an incredibly fat government and bloated bureaucracy. That's another thing that they've basically left us with and they're voting for. If you increase the size of the federal workforce by 43% and increase the budget to service it, and now it's 77, 78%, these people don't just go away if you continue voting for the same party, but we need to reduce this. It's only hurting our country. It's hurting our economy, and we're not getting any better service. There's a sweet spot. We're well over it. Shit is sour in this country. And when it comes to the mass psychosis around Trump, this Trump derangement syndrome, I don't think that generation truly understand the ramifications of their virtue signaling. Because here's the reality. Most of them just don't understand what the fuck they're talking about. If you look at Canada's GDP versus America's, then you tell me Trump's the problem. What are you talking about? If you actually understand his policy and what he's trying to do, I understand that it's affecting us negatively. I get it. And I don't necessarily like the way he's applying these things. But we are the problem. We should be diversifying our trading partners. We should be leveraging our natural resources. We should have been building a strong economy on our own, not pointing at him and blaming him for all the mistakes that we've made. But that's what these people are doing right now. So, yeah, the election highlights massive hypocrisy, and I find it very frustrating that this older, at a touch, liberal voting class is just absolutely smashing the younger working class, young Canadians for the next 20, 40 years.
I think this is a perfect example of Rob Henderson's concept of luxury beliefs, which he popularized, right? He's a Oxford graduate, now kind of just more philosophical writer. Like, he doesn't get into the political space too much, but one of the things that he pointed out, it's such a brilliant observation, is that when material wealth became extremely common, so when the average person was able to, say, buy a nice suit for $200 or whatever, then the elite classes had to start finding new ways to separate themselves from the poor, like to feel like they're on higher social status. And so his concept was that the way they've done this is through luxury beliefs. So beliefs that up their status and go, look how good and high status I am, but that actually incur costs on the very people they claim to care about. So a good example he uses is, so for instance, the idea that monogamy is outdated, right? Well, the elite class can say that you don't need to be in a monogamous relationship because they're able to financially pick up the weight of not having a 2-partner household, right? Whereas when poor people start in single mothers, like being a single mother is the number one predictor of poverty. And so,
yeah, I get it, man. I got a kid. The amount of work that takes to raise a kid. No, it's insane. Moms deserve a lot more credit. Holy shit.
For sure. But that's that point, is they can have this belief that monogamy is outdated because it doesn't affect them. But then the lower classes who want to be like the elites, like want to dress like them or want to think like them and all this kind of stuff, they take those beliefs on and then end up getting roasted. Yeah. And so I think this is exactly what you're seeing here at play, right? With, you look at the liberal platform over the last 10 years, you look at who still overwhelmingly supports the liberals, where, again, the only group in social class that favors the liberals over the conservatives is the upper class.
Yes.
And the only group among age ranges that supports the liberals over the conservatives is 65 plus. So yes, it is solely old rich people that are keeping the Liberal Party alive. And you look at these luxury beliefs. This has been their platform for the last 10 years of,
Yes.
oh, it's feminine. We're gonna be the most feminist international government in the world. We're going BLM and LGBTQ, and this is what it means to govern, is to care about these
Virtue
social
signaling.
issues.
Yes.
Exactly. So these really rich people can go, look how virtuous I am. I'm voting for the party that cares about gay people. And then it's like, but what's the cost of that? Complete economic destruction.
Yeah, we just went over the list.
Yeah.
It's bad.
Right. And so they can have this luxury belief. They have the luxury of being able to vote for the Liberal Party, which is that no other Canadians have the luxury of.
Yeah, that's a good point. I like that. Yeah, that's very well put. 100% exactly what's happening.
Hey everyone, we hope you're enjoying this episode. If so, please consider leaving us a kind review wherever you're listening. If even just a quarter of our weekly audience did so, we'd instantly become one of the top-rated Canadian podcasts. We appreciate you helping us out, and now back to the show. All right, moving on to our next story. We've got Elections Canada enlists big tech to police misinformation ahead of the election. Elections Canada is partnering with big tech platforms to monitor and suppress so-called misinformation ahead of the next federal election. While framed as a response to AI-generated content and foreign interference, critics warned this could enable state-backed censorship of dissenting political views. Chief Electoral Officer Stéphane Perreault argues Canadians overestimate their ability to detect misleading content, reinforcing the idea that officials should control the narrative. A new Elections Canada tool, ElectoFacts, will be used to debunk election-related claims, raising concerns it could filter out inconvenient truths. With Liberal-backed online regulation efforts looming, this move may undermine democratic debate, not protect it. So is Elections Canada protecting democracy or policing it by partnering with big tech to fight quote-unquote misinformation?
Honestly, all we can hope for is that Uncle Zuck doesn't fold like a cheap lawn chair or we're fucked. That's pretty much how I see this. I think if you look at the ElectoFacts program, it's a group of government-sanctioned fact-checkers who are then going to funnel their preferences to social media companies and hope that they will basically ban the content, take it down, do the same thing that we did through COVID. That's their hope. But here's the problem. If big tech bros don't push back, then the only viable tool we have, you and I have, that the people have to push back against this government narrative, a government who funds over 80% of their media, we have no way to provide a counter narrative. This is actually very, very dangerous. They're saying, oh, it's for election interference. And I can definitely appreciate the idea that you want accurate information flowing. But look, there are ways to stop foreign interference, which these programs do all the time. They have thousands and thousands of people working on shutting down Chinese spamouflage campaigns and Russian disinformation. These things are happening all the time. You don't need this program. If anything, Meta and the like already know how to do this a lot better than a group of bureaucrats that work for the Liberal government. So for me, this is a dangerous space. I really, really hope that they push back and allow us to continue having free speech on these platforms. Otherwise, I think the Liberals have a much better chance of pulling this off.
It is funny that, the chief electoral officer is arguing that Canadians overestimate their ability to detect misleading content. And you're like, the CBC's viewership is actually the best argument in favor of his narrative, which, and to be honest, I agree, actually, even across political lines. Like, there's a lot of people who you ask them why they think that way. And this happens across party lines. Again, you ask people why they believe what they believe. And a lot of people can't go more than one or two answers deep.
Right.
And so I think it is true that a lot of people fall into misleading content per se. But the issue isn't that. It's who gets to decide what is true.
Yes.
And I don't trust the government to do that. So it's like it's one of these things too, right? Where it's like the cure is worse than the disease. Like, okay,
yes.
if the disease is people being gullible and eating up common narratives, no matter where they're coming from, sure. But censorship and government control of truth is it's the vaccine for COVID.
yeah, exactly. I think it's COVID.
Yeah.
But actually, you made a good point I want to kind of expand on. Earlier, we discussed the fact that we know there's Chinese infiltration, and we know there's Russian, and we know there's Indian, and we know there's people that are meddling in our elections. Now, if you let it go and let it be, and still let the social platforms do whatever they can to shut it down, cool. But in this scenario, everybody has an opportunity to talk and the chips fall where they fall. So you could argue that is the most balanced option, because the alternative is shut it all down and there's only one version of truth, which is coming from the liberal government. So for me, it's the cure is definitely worse than the disease when you look at it like that.
Their entire narrative goes out the window when you look at who they respect as quote unquote fact checkers. Now, this person's not working with Elections Canada. However, she's a very establishment journalist figure. Are you familiar with Rachel Gilmore at all?
Yeah, rings a bell, yeah.
So anyways, CTV just brought her on as the election fact checker. So she's going to be on CTV every Friday trying to dispel misinformation about the elections, right?
Yo, help us get on CTV. Let's go.
We'll debate misinformation with you, Rachel.
100%.
But this is her in regards to, this is actually the best thing is look at people's track record. Don't just trust whether they're right or wrong. Go back and go, how accurate have they been at predicting things or understanding and filtering information as it's coming in?
You know what's so funny about that idea? If you ask people that bet on sports, they follow that shit to a T.
Yeah.
Who's the guy that's got the winning record? But when it comes to politics, the real world, they're like, oh, we don't care.
Yeah.
What?
Yeah.
Imagine there's money on it because there is your tax dollars.
So imagine thinking that this person who's about to say what I'm going to show from her COVID takes now all of a sudden is like is the beacon of truth.
You got some highbrow.
Are you going to invite your unvaccinated relatives to sit at the dinner table with you this Thanksgiving? Experts are saying you might not want to risk it. Here's why. According to one expert from McMaster University, vaccines are super effective, but they're most effective when you're surrounded by other vaccinated people. If you invite someone who isn't vaccinated, there's a risk of having a breakthrough case. Now, breakthrough cases are pretty rare. There's only ever been about 8,000 in Ontario. But kids can't get vaccinated yet. Data? So part of keeping those kids as safe as possible is telling that one uncle who chooses not to get vaccinated that he might have to sit this one out.
So she got that entire, literally every sentence that came out of her mouth, looking back in retrospect. Yeah. Now, a lot of us knew it was false at the time, but if you don't know that shit that she was saying is false now,
yes,
that's some trouble.
Well, the thing is, to your point, there's a certain amount of integrity that comes with this stuff. You and I have gotten things wrong once or twice, but that actually is it. Sorry, I was laughing. I was thinking about the Stephen Hawking midget thing. Oh my god, I forgot about that.
That was one of the best trolls of all time. I got across
that was so good. Oh my god. Yeah, so once in a while we get things wrong, but we can
give the context at least.
Oh my god. Okay, so when the Epstein list came out, not the Epstein list, when the Epstein story came out, there was a fake story that came out that said Stephen Hawking was involved and he was on Epstein Island, and that he got off to midgets that were too short. What was it?
He got sexually aroused by watching midgets trying to solve equations on a chalkboard that was too high for them to read.
Okay, so it turned out not to be true.
What
we're saying is we immediately corrected course when we found out it wasn't true. And what's fair is it came from a couple reputable sources. A lot of us bought into it. It was super jokes.
This I think is interesting because I think this comes down to values. How do you value being seen in the world? So for instance, if you have higher value on people thinking that you're intelligent than you do thinking that you're honest,
yes,
then you won't ever correct course in that sense. Where I would much rather somebody know I'm honest or think I'm honest than to have them think I'm smart.
Yeah, I don't really care what people think about my intelligence.
Right.
I'd much rather be trustworthy and honest, for sure, 100%.
And so part of that as well is, okay, if I want people to think I'm honest, then I have to correct course. And there's also this thing with this idea that, oh, well, if you get something wrong, then you're not honest. And I don't think that's the case at all. Because I can be wrong, but believe what I'm saying. It's just that given contradictory information to what I think, valuable information, then change course.
Yeah, that's silly if you're like, oh, people get things wrong and therefore they're not trustworthy. I mean, if they get things wrong constantly
Right.
and they don't vet any of their sources and they're just spewing nonsense, for sure. But if they've got one or two things wrong about midgets over the years, not a huge deal. They corrected course. Everything's fine. Yeah, I think there's a compound effect of your honesty, right? And I think it makes you a more valuable source of information. And that's why I think people like you and I are doing a lot better these days, because we honestly only have ourselves. Like, we don't have, sure, this is coming from Blendr News, but the reality is you and I are Blendr News. So it's really us. That is who people trust. It's not, well, I'm hiding behind the banner of CBC and I'm government funded, so trust me. That's not it at all. We have to win by being exponentially more honest with people. But yeah, this is one of those things that I hope sort of falls by the wayside as mainstream media continues to falter.
All right, last story for the day. We've got election lies wrapped in buzzwords, what investing in Canada really means. As another election approaches, Canadians are being misled into believing that government deficits are investments. Mark Carney, eyeing Liberal leadership, has already promised more deficit spending and even floated emergency powers to fund green energy projects. In truth, this system enriches political insiders. The government issues debt, the Bank of Canada buys that debt by printing money, and that cash usually ends up flowing into politically connected companies. You just need to look at the Green Slush Fund, where the Liberals funneled $300 million of the $1 billion budget into conflict of interests. So meanwhile, inflation rises, the cost of living soars, and everyday Canadians are left paying the price for what amounts to legalized looting. So who actually benefits from government-funded projects?
Well, to be honest, you kind of said it all there, right? It's really, these political leaders, the corporate elites, the people working, the Bank of Canada. It's all the people in that space. It's all this, we joke about the idea of it being sort of an oligarchy in this country. But those are the people, right? You get into power. You help your buddies who helped get you there. It's all these people that are getting government contracts. I mean, there's no real secret to it anymore. The problem, what upsets me, the system they have in place bankrupts Canadians. Mm-hmm. It's ruining our economy. So it's very clear. Political elite, corporate elite, all those people, they're the ones winning. Got it. Check. But, and there's a lot of nepotism in there, for sure, 100%. But it's really the Canadians that are eating crow on this. It's unfortunate because every time they do these things and they over leverage our economy or create these messes, or a good one right now is the green agenda stuff that we're talking about with Carney. It's not a good agenda. And there's no reason you'd ever pull an emergency measure for it. And they've decided to dump hundreds of billions into these infrastructure projects, these green infrastructure projects. So that's fine. That's their MO. I disagree with it. But now they're shifting all of the political landscape to suit that, and they're moving all the money towards it. So this doesn't help Canadians. We should be leveraging our natural resources. Our entire economy could be robust and strong, and everybody could be doing well, at scale, for the most part, if we shifted gears and went in this other direction. So it's not just, hey, they're the ones that are winning, but we're the ones that are losing. That was a very long-winded and terrible way of saying that, but that's my perspective is, they do these things. They're the ones that benefit, but it's not just that they benefit in a silo. It's that we pay the price significantly on the other end. And that's what's frustrating. And, the other thing that might be worse is, other than their spending inefficiency, is their ability to actually execute a project. They can't get anything done. They're terrible. It's all bureaucracy and nonsense. So sure, the government funding is completely corrupt, but then they create these robust infrastructures that get nothing done. So we not only do we pay the price, we get zero for it.
Yeah, so I think they are extremely parasitical in nature. And, I've tossed the label around on the podcast before, but I don't use this term lightly. I mean it very seriously when I say these people are psychopaths, because psychopaths are people that will destabilize long-term relationships and social cohesion for short-term personal gain.
Yes.
And that's exactly what these people are doing. To the point where even, again, you think back, I use the analogy, or not even the analogy, sorry, but I talked about how they want to subsidize from gas and oil to fund the green energy transition, and also simultaneously limiting oil and gas production. So you're going to run out of cash. The exact same thing is happening here with all this public spending, which is you've got a tax base that you need to tax for all of your public spending, and they can't afford it anymore. And so you're going to, it's literally like a parasite killing its host.
Yes.
Both entities end up dying. And so it's not even that they'll continue on and we'll all crumble. It's like, no, this entire apparatus that they've built will crumble if they continue looting us.
Yeah, I agree with you. I think that's well put. You definitely take the more extreme road than I do in your explanation, but I like it.
I don't even think it's that extreme in the sense where like psychopaths definitely exist. And I also don't think like this idea that any industry would be free from them, whether it be banking or whether it be like, I think we all know that most people on Wall Street are extremely unethical and just care. They would be perfectly happy with causing another housing crisis if they get rich off of it. They don't give a shit.
Well, no, I agree. I think if you look at the people at the top of these organizations, whether it's corporate or political, yes, you've got some pretty dark individuals. You do. Like, I think you can have highly successful corporations that aren't in bed with government. I think that those can exist. And I think that leaders can be fantastic that are at the top. I think you get guys like Bukele, you know what I mean, in El Salvador that are doing a great job. You get Javier Milei in Argentina doing a great job. But they came in because they need a radical change. When things are status quo, the people at the top of both of these organizations that are working together, yeah, I think Psychopaths is a label that fits.
All right, anything else you want to add today?
That is everything.
All right, before we get out of here, don't forget to head over to our Substack where you can sign up for a newsletter which goes out 5 days a week. That's blendrnews.substack.com, BLENDR news.substack.com. Thank you for supporting the show, and we'll catch you next week.
Bye, everybody.